All right.
Hi, Wade.
Well, hello there, Casey. So we're a little bit late, obviously, but I'm doing this for Events Magazine Online and also for my little podcast, just so you know. Um, so I did watch the documentary.
Mhm.
And what first made you interested in America's search for a nuclear waste repository as a topic?
I'm glad you put it that way because it's almost the phrase itself that that made me interested.
Yeah.
The America's search for a nuclear waste repository. I mean, it's like, how is that not interesting? Um, but specifically, you know, I saw it that way after I came across some documents. I was researching Yucca Mountain, which was the site that was ultimately selected at the end of this process. Um, and in doing so, I came across some reports that the Department of Energy had produced on the other candidate sites. Um, and in seeing these, extensive environmental assessment reports produced by the Department of Energy in accordance with the Nuclear Waste Policy Act that sort of established this process of looking across the country and finding candidate sites and then evaluating candidate sites and then selecting which site would ultimately be chosen. Um, I found these reports and they were, 400, 500 pages long of just analytical text, maps, statistics, diagrams, everything except a human story. Um, and in seeing these documents on these small rural places across the country, and the extent of the analysis that the Department of Energy had produced on each of these places, this idea of the nation searching for a sacrificial lamb of sorts for this nuclear waste repository um, kind of planted itself in my mind as this grand narrative, and I was immediately very curious about the people and the communities and the stories that were not a part of this set of materials um, that was kind of the official documentation of the bureaucratic process to make this determination. And so the film was, in a way, an idea to discover those human stories and to assemble them in contrast to this way of characterizing a place through this utilitarian viewpoint versus a humanistic viewpoint.
And when it comes to the nuclear waste, where does that exactly come from? Does it come from nuclear tests, or are there other sources?
Yeah.
Nuclear energy production, or
Yes.
the tests?
Yeah. It comes from all of it, but um, the majority of the high level nuclear waste that's being produced comes from the nuclear reactors. So wherever
Okay.
there's a nuclear power plant, after they run the nuclear fuel rods through the power plant for some period of time, um, they become spent fuel, and those are high level nuclear waste, and they have to be managed, and they're lethally radioactive for over 10,000 years. And so the scientific consensus for what we do with this material is to basically find a suitable geological medium and to dig down really deep and to bury it and to leave it there. um, but yes, it comes from anywhere there's a nuclear power plant, they're producing nuclear waste, and then also anywhere there's there we're not doing so many nuclear tests in the present day, but we certainly were if you go back a few decades, and a lot of nuclear waste is produced in that process as well.
And how did you decide whose voices would tell the story, and what guided your choices during the production?
Yeah. Um, there was a question. I mean, I always knew from the beginning that the film I wanted to primarily be a people's history, that it would be assembled from people's stories in these communities about what they're experiencing in the present day, and also about the the experience of facing this possibility of being selected and their encounter with the Department of Energy in making this decision. And of course, in certain sites in the film that are more connected to historical and ongoing nuclear activities, like the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington or the Nevada nuclear testing site in southern Nevada, people are really still dealing with the impacts and ongoing nuclear programs. So I wanted to hear from people in these communities dealing with these issues, and to reserve the voice of the Department of Energy for the documents themselves. There was a period of time in working on the film where I was trying to get in touch with certain representatives from the DOE or people who worked at these various sites, um, uh, and kind of consider integrating some um, official viewpoint. But ultimately, I would have only, first of all, I wasn't really able to speak with anyone. But if I would have been, I probably would have received, a kind of PR version of their
Sure.
narrative. And the truth of their narrative is there in the archive anyway. So that was ultimately what I decided to do with the film, was that the governmental voice comes through the documents that they themselves produced, and the people's voice comes from the people.
And one interesting aspect of the movie is that these official documents they sort of almost have a disjointed conversation with the people that you interview. Like it creates a weird mood, a clash between like this um mundane language versus the reality of the people, like the I guess more down home and folksy
Yeah,
elements of the documentary versus the cold and calculating language that attempts to be like too neutral, I would say.
right, right. Yeah,
So
this,
it's almost like man versus machine in a way,
yeah,
uh, like humans versus robots. That's almost like the vibe that I got out of it personally.
right, right, right. This like, yeah, bureaucratic machine for sure. I mean, there's the one excerpt, and I think it's in, yeah, it's in Washington and the Hanford site, and I don't remember the exact phrasing, but it says something like, study area residents have been shown to have uh, more knowledge about nuclear materials than the general public, you know, and that's like an excerpt from the report on this place. And then we hear from Tom Bailey, who lived next to the Hanford Nuclear Reservation his entire life and talks about the impacts of being a downwinder, um, and facing the kind of contaminated environment. So that's, you know, on one hand, that's a validation of the statement from the Department of Energy, that the fact that study area residents know more about nuclear materials. Well, yes, they did. They've been dealing with it their whole lives than the general public. But what they have to say about it is certainly not neutral.
Well, one thing that's lost on some people is that when things like these happen, people are sort of made into activists. It's not necessarily a role everybody was born to play. They feel like they have to speak out against something, and I think this documentary really emphasizes that quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you kind of see, and you get to gain a kind of uncommon solidarity between like the activists who are really, activists to their core, with other folks in other communities who are forced into being an activist out of necessity. So, like, later on in the film in Nevada, there's a sequence where I'm kind of joining a group of peace activists who are marching down the highway, actually over the course of 6 days from Las Vegas to the gates of the Nevada test site. And they do this every year as a matter of conscience. Um, and they approach the test site and they submit themselves to be arrested. Um, and these are hardcore, lifelong activists. But in the film, we sort of feel them in connection with and in solidarity with, the farmers in Texas who would never have been activists were they not sort of forced into defending their communities against this unwanted intrusion.
And what surprised you about the histories of these different candidate sites that you covered in the documentary? Were there any surprising insights, I guess?
I think there's so much that I learned about each of these places. It's, because there's so much to learn, and I was really in a process of uh, continuously researching both through reading, through the archive, and through these conversations with people in each of these communities. Um, all kinds of little surprises here and there. But I think the the thing that really sticks with me is just this um, sense of resilience and tenacity and and fortitude, that comes out of each of these places. And not that I wouldn't have expected it, but but to encounter it and to engage with people and to learn the circumstances that they went through and to um, understand the specifics of their own histories and sort of what motivated their response to these circumstances. Um, it just it creates a very deep respect for the strength um, that they all um, channeled,
And
as they fought this.
nowadays, this seems to tie in a little bit with the AI data center issue because even people who sometimes use AI, they're not necessarily villains, but uh, I mean, what we're ultimately contributing to environmental problems because these AI data centers are so they're bad for the environment. So, what would you say about the "not in my backyard" aspect of this? That whole thing.
Yeah, I think the phrase "not in my backyard" is usually used as an effort to try and dismiss people's concerns.
Sure.
Um, and there's a conversation to be had about, okay, well, if we have to deal with something, it's got to go somewhere. We've got to deal with it. Uh, we can't just have everyone dismiss it and say, not in my backyard. But that's a reductive characterization of the situation. These are people, expressing their, you know, demanding a certain responsibility to their dignity, demanding a certain transparency about the process, demanding a certain standard of democratic engagement, so that something isn't just shoved down their throat because they
Sure.
have less political power or less economic power. So I think the lesson here is not so much to talk about this not in my backyard point of view, but instead to think about um, the civic circumstances that we have to engender in order to deal with these issues, and that involves like consent, transparency, um, democracy, uh, and not attempts to subvert all of these processes in the name of expediency or profit.
And what sort of updates have there been when it comes to this nuclear waste disposal? Have there been any new um, news stories about any of this?
Yeah, it's for the longest time it was kind of just sitting dormant. I mean, the film sort of concludes by telling you that the Yucca Mountain site eventually was abandoned, or the Yucca Mountain project. Um, was abandoned and never became operational, and for many good reasons, that's the case. Um, and It had been this debate inside the nuclear industry as to what's going to happen with this nuclear waste, because this is a real thorn in the side of the nuclear industry. If they're, for advocates of nuclear power, um, if they're going to continue producing nuclear waste, there has to be some sort of solution for dealing with nuclear waste. So it's been this kind of quiet debate. What's happening with it? What's happening with it? Some people say, oh, it should go at Yucca Mountain. Other people say, um, no, Yucca Mountain has been totally disproven as like a valid site for this. Um, and now what we're seeing, actually, just as of this year, the federal government has put out a call for proposals to states, um, for what they're referring to as next generation nuclear innovation campus, I think is the phrase. And and
Catchy
what they're
title. Catchy title.
yeah, I know exactly, right. And what they're hoping to do is to develop the next generation of nuclear technology, also in some cases co-locate data centers, and also in those same campuses, um, site geologic storage um, repositories. And so several states, there are 5 states, and I should have looked. This is just very recently developing. There are 5 states who have kind of answered this call, and the federal government has sort of listed them as their finalists for potentially hosting um, these next generation nuclear innovation campuses. Um, and they include Tennessee, Utah, Oklahoma, um, and there are 2 others I'm forgetting right now.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So I've got like one last. It's almost more of a comment. Like with the environmental crises going on, I think more people will become activists about a whole bunch of different issues. Like I also thought about the tsunami that happened in Japan back in 2011, which triggered a nuclear uh, disaster there.
Hmm.
And like recently, where I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I have to name drop where I live, but we were dealing with some of the most toxic air on the planet because of the forest fires in Canada. It was like the rating was up in like near the 1,000 mark on that scale. So I think documentaries like this are probably going to end up flourishing, whether people watch them or not. So because the environmental crises are just going to be escalating. What are
Right.
your thoughts on that?
Well, they definitely are escalating, and I only hope that people um, you know tune in and pay attention to this kind of media. It's difficult because there's a lot of saturation. We're all inundated with information. Our attention spans are all constantly depleted by, social media, this constant flood of barrage of fragments of information about all these crises. But there's a lot that can be learned from a longer and
Sure.
more artistic engagement, and I hope that people are willing to yeah to watch and enjoy and learn from this type of film.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. That's all. That's all the time I've got. So I'll talk to you maybe some other time when the next documentary is out.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.